Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Sunday to you. Hopefully you're having a great weekend. Wanted to bring you up to date on Disturbance 97L. A little bit later this afternoon, coming up around 3-ish or so, they will start initiating advisories on Potential Tropical Cyclone number 18. It hasn't quite made its way up to tropical depression status, but it's strong enough, we think, to be able to put out some tropical storm watches and warnings down into parts of the Caribbean. Real quick, though, I wanted to go over that trough that's out in the west and the ridge in the east. So we are seeing some gusty winds across Acadiana today, and that also includes the offshore waters. And those winds at times have been somewhat strong, so a small craft advisory is in effect. And those seas running about 3 to 5 feet in the nearshore water and up to 7 feet in the far offshore waters. And we also have a coastal flood warning west of Cameron and a coastal flood advisory east of Cameron, including the entire Louisiana coastline. So some minor coastal flooding is going to be possible here, at least locally. So right now, again, Potential Tropical Cyclone number 18 that is going to be getting that designation a little bit later is currently 97L, and it has a 90% chance that it's going to turn into a tropical depression or tropical storm sometime in the next couple of days. You can't really see it on the Central American satellite, but you get a good view of it on the main Caribbean satellite. And this is the area that we're looking at right here down to the south. You're starting to see a bit of rotation. Reconnaissance aircraft will be checking it out. And of course, because it's so close to Colombia, as well as eventually going to be making its way toward Jamaica and Cuba, they're going to go ahead and initiate these advisories so they can start to put out tropical storm watches and warnings well ahead of any impact there of some of the northern Caribbean islands. Also, if you lost track over the weekend, we had Patty, which was a subtropical storm that developed way out here in the northern part of the Atlantic. That's Patty way up there. It'll go post-tropical a little bit later on this afternoon, but it's still going to be impacting parts of far western Europe as we go into the next couple of days. And we've got a bit of a frontal boundary with a low pressure area right about there. That is most likely going to be absorbed by the rest of what is going to become Potential Tropical Cyclone 18. And then you got a pretty good tropical wave that's out here in the Atlantic Ocean. That might actually become Sebastian a little bit farther down the road. We promised you a busy start to November, and it looks like the models are going to deliver. So let's go ahead and look at the surface features, and that low, which is 97L, is right there. And then you've got that other low at the tail end of the front that's eventually probably just going to be absorbed by 97L. And Patty is out here in the far northern part of the Atlantic, and there's that other tropical wave right there that could potentially become Sebastian a little bit farther down the road. But current position with winds at 35 miles per hour, the coordinates there on the left-hand side of your screen, 13.3 north, 77.3 west, and the pressure at 10.05. And look at some of the computer models. Really interesting to see these lined up like this, especially for the first 4 days. But then you get to day 5 and 6. There's some spread there, and the models that go out to day 6 and 7 do track this up toward Louisiana, believe it or not. And the intensity models have gotten a lot stronger, at least with a handful of these, but the majority of these are still holding in the low-end Category 1 hurricane to tropical storm down to the bottom. And most likely we're going to see some strengthening, perhaps there in the western part of the Caribbean, there around Jamaica or into Cuba and through the Yucatan Channel, but then it still might be able to hold its own in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. But if it tries to move toward the northern Gulf Coast, it is going to start to encounter some colder waters. So we're not expecting anything to continue strengthening as it moves toward the coast. It would either hold its own, or most likely it would start to weaken somewhat, and that's what some of the computer models are showing. But I wanted to go through the hurricane models real quick, and this is taking us through early Friday, and the HWRF gets this up to hurricane status for a little while in the Gulf of Mexico, and it stays fairly strong as it gets closer to the Gulf Coast, but then it starts to weaken as it starts to push into the colder waters. And the HAFS model kind of does the same thing, although the HAFS model is a little bit farther toward the west. It kind of rounds that western tip of Cuba and then gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And this forecasts a strong hurricane in the Gulf, but it does tend to weaken as it gets closer to the Louisiana or the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Again, that's not the final solution, but that is what the general consensus of tracks are for right now. So there's a quick look at the next several days. In this, the GFS shows something making landfall in Louisiana, although in a weakened form by the time it reaches us. And then you can see there off to the east, there's another low that kind of spins over there toward the Bahamas. Could that possibly be Sebastian a little bit farther down the road? The Euro model shows the low festering in the Caribbean for the next couple 3 days and then starts to make its move across western Cuba and into the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. But notice it also tends to weaken a little bit as it gets closer to the northern Gulf Coast. The Canadian model is very similar to the other two, kind of working its way over Cuba, although this takes a little bit of a turn toward Florida. Then it kind of stalls a bit. It weakens as it kind of drifts its way onshore of the northern Gulf Coast. And the Icon model shows only some minor strengthening over to around Cuba and Jamaica. And then once it reaches the Gulf of Mexico, it ends up being completely torn apart. And on this particular model run, it just kind of falls apart and there's nothing left. Although you do see a bit of a remnant low pressure, another low pressure area, I should say, off to the east. Not necessarily a remnant low pressure, but what might be part of that tropical wave. Who knows? Could we have Sebastian a little bit farther down the road? So comparing the four models going out to early Friday morning, GFS has a fairly weak system, a weakened form system right off the Louisiana coast by Friday morning. The Euro also showing a weakening system moving toward the northern Gulf Coast on Friday morning. The Canadian model shoves things a little bit farther to the east of Louisiana, also in a weakened form, and the Icon has it completely fizzle out by the time it reaches the northern Gulf Coast. So that's kind of the consensus, that we might see some strengthening here in the short term, but in the long term, especially if this were to move toward the northern Gulf Coast, it would encounter much more wind shear and also some colder waters. So most likely it would not get any stronger. In fact, it would be more likely to weaken as it moves a little bit closer to the northern Gulf Coast. So there's a look at your water temperatures. We can still sustain tropical systems over most of the Gulf, but the water temperatures along the immediate coast have now dropped below the 80-degree mark. And we're also looking at the tropical cyclone heat potential there over the western Caribbean is still quite high. That's why there could be some strengthening there, maybe a little bit there over the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, but the majority of the Gulf of Mexico is now starting to see that tropical cyclone heat potential really drop off with those colder waters. And there's a lot of wind shear around where this low wants to develop over the central part of the Caribbean, but there's also a lot of wind shear here at home. But by the time we get to, let's say, early Friday morning, you can see there's considerably less wind shear in the southern two-thirds of the Gulf of Mexico. But as I've said, if something wants to move toward the northern Gulf Coast, it's going to encounter stronger wind shear and also some colder water. So the possibility or the likelihood of this staying very strong or getting strong and strengthening probably is not going to happen. Most likely we would see weakening as it headed toward the northern Gulf Coast. So again, 97L is going to be upgraded to potential tropical cyclone number 18, and most likely we are going to see this becoming Tropical Storm Raphael here in the next couple of days. Something to watch, something not to get too worried about, but it is just something that you want to keep on your radar here over the next couple of days. So I hope you've enjoyed your Sunday. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, turn on those notifications, and stick with me through the week, and you'll find out everything that's going on with this potential system. Also, starting on Monday, you'll hear my forecast on the morning shows, midday and the afternoon drive on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. Really excited to get started with such a great team. And in between all these broadcasts, follow my social media pages both on Facebook and X. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll talk to you tomorrow morning for Acadiana weather today. And when the advisories start to go out on potential tropical cyclone number 18, you'll be able to follow those on my social media pages. I'll see you tomorrow.